Hey everybody, my name is Justin Barad. I'm co-founder and CEO of Osso VR, a surgical simulation platform, although it is quite stimulating as well. I actually got my start in video game development. So I've been programming since middle school. I have a game credit with Activision. And when I was finishing up high school, a family member became very ill. And it got me wondering, maybe there's a way to use software and technology, not necessarily for entertainment, but to help people. So I ended up changing my major from computer science to biomedical engineering with this strong desire to invent healthcare technology. But I had no idea how to get started with invention. So I was asking around for advice, and a mentor told me something that sticks with me to this day. He said, if you want to invent something, you really need to understand the problem you're trying to solve first. And he thought a great way to understand medical problems was to be a doctor. So I took his advice far too literally, and I went to med school at UCLA, and then I did my orthopedic surgery residency there, and then a fellowship in pediatric orthopedics at Boston Children's Hospital, and was able to combine my two life passions of video games and healthcare, and founded Osso VR in 2016. I point this at a particular location? There we go. Our mission at Osso VR is to improve patient outcomes with better education and assessment, increase the adoption of higher value medical technologies and techniques, and democratize access to surgical education for everyone, everywhere. One of the things we're most proud of at Osso is our team. We have over 150 employees. We have the world's largest medical illustration team. We have an Oscar and Emmy-winning art studio that rivals what you'd find at Industrial Light and Magic or Disney, and have raised $43 million in venture capital. We're backed by GSR and Kaiser Permanente, amongst other leading healthcare investors. Quickly, you heard from a great presenter earlier a little bit about the problem we're trying to solve, and I'd like to give you my perspective on it. The first challenge is really there's simply too much to learn. So if you think about it, accelerating science and technology is expanding the library of procedures healthcare professionals are expected to know how to do on demand. It's like we've gone from French Laundry to Cheesecake Factory. You can't do everything well. I still like Cheesecake Factory. But just to tell you a personal anecdote, one day I was minding my own business when I was called by the LA Zoo to operate on a gorilla, which hopefully you realize I was unprepared for. There's a lot of Googling, and Jabari ended up doing great. But we're dealing with gorilla-like situations on a near daily basis in healthcare. Surgeries maybe we've never done before or only do very rarely. Secondly, modern surgical procedures are really complicated. So everything that everyone's talking about at this conference, robotics, minimally invasive techniques, patient-specific guides and implants, tend to have longer learning curves. Whereas a traditional surgery might have a learning curve of 10 to 20 cases, most modern procedures are more like 50 to 100. Finally, we lack a way to assess technical skills in healthcare. In my own career, and orthopedics is a little bit different than general surgery, the only time I've really been checked, I was literally asked to play the board game Operation. Without buzzing, which I did, and I'm proud of, but we can do a bit better. And obviously the pandemic has really accelerated these dynamics significantly. So I got involved in virtual reality very early and immediately recognized the ability to address this problem. You can use it anytime, anywhere, using your hands with realistic cutaneous haptic feedback and train on any procedure. It's a universal simulation platform. You can get the team involved, so you could train as a team or get coached remotely, and you could get objective assessment for one of the first times ever. So I'd love to show you a quick clip of the technology in action and point out a few key things here. So virtual reality is not new. Simulation is not new. But when people see or try Osso VR, what they tell us is, wow, this is really different from what I've seen before. What's going on here? And what's going on is we have put together, once again, this award-winning art team to create clinically accurate visuals, but also an inspiring experience that gets people excited about trying something new, which you can see here in this orthopedic trauma procedure. As you all know, introducing a new technology in healthcare is very hard. And even if something works, and works obviously well, you need to give people a reason to use it. You need to get them excited about it. And we do that with the power of art and our AAA film level visuals. You can also see here in this video the ability to train collaboratively. So I'm actually in this video training with someone in New York while I'm in California, and they're acting as my surgical tech, and we're running through this trauma procedure very realistically as if we were doing it in real life. And while I'm doing this, I'm actually pulled over on the side of the road in my car, which I don't recommend. But you can literally use this anywhere on a $300 headset. It's quite wild. Another thing I want to demonstrate, we discussed objective assessment. So you're seeing some of that here, where we're assessing knowledge of steps of the procedure, your accuracy of those steps, and your efficiency, as well as an overall proficiency rating. Now, many people ask, well, does this actually work? And so we've done extensive clinical validation, which I'd like to go over with you now to point out a few key things here. Let's see if we can get this video to play. Yep. Well, the first thing is a study that was performed at UCLA. Where they're looking at 20 trainees, 10 trained in virtual reality to a set level of proficiency, and then 10 trained traditionally. And what they found in that study is that the Osso VR trained group performed 230% better as measured by something called OSATs, or 10 points better when compared with traditional training. This was published in the Journal of Surgical Education a couple of years ago. The next study was published in a top orthopedic journal, and this was performed at University of Illinois Chicago, and this found that the ability to perform a procedure without needing supervision, without needing someone to step in, went from 25% to 78% using Osso VR training and assessment. Those studies were in orthopedic trauma. This is in joint replacement, and a very similar outcome. This found that the OSAT score went up about 6 points, procedure time improved by 10 minutes, and the number of redirections decreased by about 60%, or 9 to 3. This is a study currently being submitted for publication from UCLA, where they compared two groups, one trained and coached in virtual reality, and they found the VR group was faster and more successful when completing a pediatric hip pinning procedure. Now, there's a lot of questions around haptic feedback, both within simulation and robotics. The important thing to understand is that off-the-shelf virtual reality, what we're using uses cutaneous haptics, whereas what you saw just now is either some form of kinesthetic haptic feedback, whether that's passive or simulated. And in this study performed at Johns Hopkins, where they're comparing Osso VR, which is cutaneous haptics, to a passive haptic model with a physical bone model, soft tissue envelope, and real-life X-ray, they found no difference in performance when training with off-the-shelf VR versus that passive haptic system, which is very interesting. And if anyone wants to talk about it, there's a lot of research in this area, and it's a fascinating area of conversation. Happy to do a deep dive, but it is really fun to talk about. This is a study performed at Wake Forest where they found 100% of the residents there found Osso VR effective, would recommend it to their peers, and most importantly, found it to be easy to use and enjoyable. We need to balance realism with engagement and education. It's important to balance those variables. Finally, I want to talk about one last story with you all. We talked about 230%, 300%, all these big numbers. I'm an orthopedic surgeon. I'm relatively simple, so I have a hard time wrapping my head around these things. And so this story makes sense to me. This is the story of a fully trained joint replacement surgeon out in practice who's trying to transition from a traditional hip replacement or posterior hip replacement to a more minimally invasive hip replacement or an anterior hip. The data shows for a fully trained surgeon, making that transition takes about 50 to 100 cases, which can be up to 6 months depending on your case volume. Now, this surgeon operated on a patient on her right side, and it was a tough case. It took about 3 hours and 30 minutes. Ideally, you want to be between 1 to 2 hours when you're proficient. He then enrolled in an Osso VR virtual curriculum for about 2 to 3 weeks, did 91 sessions, about 5 to 9 minutes a session, spent about 6 hours in the platform, and had a remote expert come in to give him some clinical tips, tricks, and pearls. And what's really interesting is he then operated on that same patient, just on the other hip. And that side took 1 hour and 45 minutes, half the time. So I spoke to this surgeon and I asked, hey, how much did this help? How much was the other stuff? And he said, virtual reality 5x'd my learning curve. And I'm at case 10, where I expected to be at case 50. So I ask all of you to scale this up. There are about 1.1 million surgeons around the world, 310 million major procedures performed annually. Imagine if every single one of those, we can be cutting that surgical time in half. 5x'ing the learning curve, not practicing on 40 people, improving performance 200 and 300%. And I think what's important to understand is that the major gaps we have in surgical care delivery is not necessarily what we're doing it, but how we're doing it. And you can really expand your imagination on the potential impact we can all have with simulation and video game technology at scale, whereas you heard in the prior presentation, right now it is fragmented and there's no universal platform that can address this on a global basis, which is what's so exciting about this space. So thank you all for the opportunity to present here at LSI. This is an incredible conference. I'll be next door if anyone has any questions.